Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating and air, restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marcos Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening. It's Monday, April 11th. Thanks for joining us. I'm Amita Sharma, in for Maya Trabulsi. Tonight, more death and destruction in Ukraine, nearly 7 weeks since Russia's invasion. Millions of people have left their homes. Thousands are seeking refuge at our southern border. KPBS reporter Kitty Alvarado begins our coverage with how a Chula Vista Church's mission to help is changing.
Calvary San Diego has been a refuge for Ukrainians who had just crossed the border from Tijuana on the last leg of their journey. This is what it looked like less than 2 weeks ago. Joy Metzger with Calvary San Diego says they opened their doors when they saw the need.
It was just the obvious thing to do. They were in Mexico.
But this is what it looks like now. Calvary San Diego has stepped back as nonprofits with greater access to government-funded services stepped in.
We've had over 2,500 people coming in and through, either sleeping, staying for their next transport, taking a shower, and then heading off.
They're still working with families at the border, helping them find transportation and host families from their church, like the Seidels from Bonita, empty nesters who raised 7 children and now have 4 grandchildren. The Chornoby family of 4 is the second family that stayed with them.
It's not like having strangers in our house. It's like, I feel like we've known them.
Max says the journey was tough. They were afraid they wouldn't make it out alive.
It was very scary because you're standing on the line and they can send bomb to this line.
And when they got to the border, they lost their luggage and missed their ride. The Seidels took them in, helped them get some clothes, showed them around San Diego, and even raised money for their airfare to Kentucky, where they have family.
They are so good. We are so thankful God, Roy, Susan, they're so good people, really. Yeah, they're almost like angels. We love you guys. You're so amazing. Thanks for everything.
We wanted to help them and bless them, but they have been a huge blessing to us.
Right now, 75 host families from Calvary San Diego have opened their hearts and homes to families from Ukraine.
We're very proud of our community, of how they came together.
Kitty Alvarado, KPBS News.
Russia's focus in the war has shifted to eastern Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says his troops can fight back, but insists they need help from the U.S. Isabel Rosales has the latest.
Ukraine bracing for a major Russian assault in the east.
Russia is preparing another offensive.
In Mariupol, relentless shelling.
You understand that somebody is dying at that moment, but you're actually happy that it's not you.
Ukraine's president says tens of thousands of people have died in the city. The latest battle for the Donbas region is underway. Some Ukrainians evacuating west. There is a lot of bombing here, says Oksana. I'm afraid for the children. Russian troops withdrawing from the north, but building up in the east. The fighting there expected to be pivotal in this war.
Speaking, I don't think we can differentiate between, stages of hell that Ukraine is now going through.
President Volodymyr Zelensky insists his people are ready for this new wave of Russian attacks, but says they can't do it alone.
All depends on how fast we will be helped by the United States. To be honest, whether we will be able to survive depends on this.
And for that chance of survival, the Ukrainians are pleading for weapons, planes, tanks, and defense systems. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin appointing a general nicknamed the Butcher of Syria to lead troops, according to one U.S. and one European official. Alexander Dvornikov is the mastermind behind brutal tactics in past conflicts, leading to major civilian deaths. In Washington, Isabel Rosales, KPBS News.
While much of the focus now is on Ukrainian refugees at our border, asylum seekers displaced from a makeshift camp in Tijuana find themselves in more danger than ever. Their stories coming up on Evening Edition. In the North County, healthcare workers can't reach a deal with one of the region's largest providers. KPBS health reporter Matt Hoffman explains.
This is the most hostile and racist and most anti-union, anti-worker administration that I ever worked with since 2003.
In Escondido, caregivers and nurses are calling on Palomar Health to bargain in good faith after more than a year of talks still hasn't resulted in a new contract.
Very, very anti-union. Very anti-union. We never had this experience before.
The unions say management has been intimidating employees, something they say they saw again during Monday's news conference as management watched on.
It's kind of like intimidating, but I don't care. I don't care. They can hear what we are saying because what we are saying is true.
Palomar Health officials say they have been asking employees if they would participate in a strike. Chief of Human Resources Jeff Washburn maintains that's not intimidation and it's the company's right. He also pushes back on allegations of racism.
That's fictitious, erroneous, quite frankly, it's shameful and disappointing.
The contract for the caregivers and nurses expired last month. Palomar Health officials say they recently made their last, best, and final offer, which included 4% raises over the next 3 years.
We've offered those last, best, and finals just because we need to move discussions along. So are we still open to negotiations? Absolutely. We're ready to meet. We just can't be held hostage to these delays.
Gildardo Milan has been a food service worker for 30 years at Palomar Health. He says some of his coworkers are making just above minimum wage.
So every year is 4%. Inflation is almost 8% right now. Right. You know, come on, you cannot survive it.
The union says it's not all about money. There's also disagreements about patient care and contracting out certain services.
I think that's kind of how they're trying to portray it, that we're greedy or something, and they're trying to say that, hey, this is a great offer, you haven't had a raise, you need this.
Both sides say after 20 years of contract negotiations, it is unusual that a new deal can't be finalized. There hasn't been a strike vote called, but the union is accusing Palomar's management of illegally declaring an impasse of negotiations.
We're not anti-union. We had a good relationship for many years. They're just pushing the envelope right now.
The nurses and caregivers unions represent about 3,000 employees. Matt Hoffman, KPBS News.
On the heels of another weekend of deadly gun violence, President Biden announced a new regulation around so-called ghost guns. The untraceable weapons have been popping up at more crime scenes nationwide. Karen Kafa has more from Washington.
These ghost guns from
President Joe Biden Monday taking steps he hopes will help stem a rise in gun violence.
If you commit a crime with a ghost gun, expect federal prosecution.
The White House in particular trying to curb so-called ghost guns, like one a police source said was recovered over the weekend in connection with the fatal shooting of a 16-year-old girl in New York City's South Bronx.
The number of ghost guns in New York City and on Long Island are skyrocketing.
Kits to assemble the guns can be purchased online in most states, with some parts unregulated and without serial numbers untraceable.
Because you can circumvent background checks, domestic abusers, convicted felons, people who would not otherwise be able to have a gun can now get their hands on one.
The new federal regulations will require purchasers to pass a background check, manufacturers to put serial numbers on the firearms components, and firearm dealers to add a serial number to already built ghost guns they come across.
These guns are weapons of choice for many criminals. We're going to do everything we can to deprive them of that choice.
Biden also named Steve Dettelbach, a former U.S. attorney from Ohio, to lead the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. The federal agency tasked with enforcing federal gun laws has not had a permanent director since 2015. In Washington, Karen Kafa, KPBS News.
San Diego has its own ghost gun bans. Mayor Todd Gloria signed the Eliminate Non-Serialized Untraceable Firearms Ordinance last September. And in January, the County Board of Supervisors passed a law banning the distribution or creation of ghost guns. The San Diego County Fair could be canceled for a third straight year. That's the claim made in court papers filed today by fair officials. They're asking for a stay on a ruling that invalidated the contract awarded to this year's Carnival rides operator. They say there is simply not enough time to find a new Carnival operator. Last week, a judge issued an injunction saying there's enough evidence to suggest the bidding process was rigged in favor of Ray Kammick shows. John Moot is the attorney who filed the lawsuit on behalf of Tally Amusements.
It's the same arguments they made before, that they can't put on a Midway Carnival if there's an injunction in place. That's simply not true. Tally Amusements can be there and put on a full carnival if that's what they want.
A hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. The San Diego County Fair is slated to open June 8th. Workers at Albertsons, Vaughn's, Pavilions, and Ralph's throughout Southern California are voting this week on a new 3-year contract. KPBS Speak City Heights reporter Jacob Ayer spoke to people voting today in Chula Vista.
Unions representing food workers across Southern California came to a tentative agreement with the grocery chains on April 4th. Now they have a chance to vote to make the new terms official. Todd Walters is the president of the United Food and Commercial Workers Local 135. He describes some of what's in the contract.
There's going to be some much needed wage increases coming in. Those increases will be put throughout different classifications. Most importantly, take care of our workers that have been held down for so long. We've got some improvements on some of the language in our contract, minimum hour guarantee, so that people don't have to have 2 and 3 jobs.
Julia Jaramillo came out to vote today. She's about to start working in the deli section of a Vaughn's in Eastlake this Wednesday. She recently changed jobs from cafeteria work at Sweetwater Union High School District.
En el distrito solamente tengo 3 horas y media durante el día.
In the district, I only have 3.5 hours during the day. It's not enough to live. So my idea was to look for a job with more hours, with better benefits, and with a better salary.
Minimum wage has been collapsing upon some of our wage brackets, and we've got 20 and 30-year members that are making just $2 above minimum wage. We're not trying to get rich. We're just trying to have a livable wage in San Diego County, and I think we did it.
Walter says the changes apply to workers from Bakersfield to the border. Voting continues tomorrow in Escondido and Wednesday in Mission Valley. Results are expected at the end of this week. If the contract is ratified, the changes will be applied retroactively, going back to March 7th. Jacob Ayer, KPBS News.
Many of the bananas and pineapples making their way to San Diego will be moved by new electric trucks. The food company Dole is adding 5 new zero-emission trucks to the fleet it uses to unload cargo at the Port of San Diego. That means less pollution on the bay and in surrounding neighborhoods. Dole hopes to transition to an all-electric fleet at the port by 2030.
That is a real win. It's a win for the environment. It's a win for the community. It's a win for the maritime business here in San Diego, and that's exactly what we're trying to do here.
The electric trucks cost $1.5 million. Some of that money came from the State Air Resources Board, which provides financial incentives and rebates for electric vehicles.
Cool and windy to start off the week, and also a little precipitation in the area. We'll see some light showers around tonight into tomorrow morning, mostly along the west slopes of the coastal mountains. But in some of the higher terrain, about 6,000 feet, we may even see an inch or 2 of snow. So that's a look at our headlines. Cool and windy, slight chance of showers as we start off the week, but we'll see slightly warmer weather coming in Wednesday into Thursday. High winds, though, expected into tonight here in the mountains. High wind warnings, and the winds gusting over 60 miles an hour. Along the coast, we do have small craft advisories and gale warnings offshore. Overnight tonight, winds will be strong and gusty. Temperatures dipping down into the mid-50s. Other locales like Oceanside to Ramona will be in the 40s, and will dip down to the 30s around Mount Laguna. As we take a look at the weather for Tuesday, well, very cool flow here over the southwest with this trough overhead. Temperatures here hovering in the 60s for most. Some 70s will start to show up around Borrego Springs and San Diego at 72. A little cooler, though, at Mount Laguna. Looking ahead, well, it looks like it'll be dry and still a little cool into Wednesday, but temperatures will start to creep up later in the week. So as we head to the coast, we'll see a partly sunny, breezy Tuesday. Wednesday and Thursday, a little bit more pleasant. As we head our way to the inland sections, quite cool, that gusty wind on Tuesday, and then temperatures start to creep up back in the 70s by Thursday. And in the mountains, a little bit chilly here, 40s and 50s. And in the desert, we'll see temperatures rising into the 80s for the end of the week. And it should be dry. And for KPBS News, I'm meteorologist Mark Mancuso.
Pacific Gas and Electric will pay out a combined $55 million settlement over faulty equipment that sparked 2 wildfires. In 2019, the Kincaid fire burned more than 77,000 acres in Sonoma County. Then, last summer, the Dixie fire charred close to 1 million acres across 5 northern counties. The settlement also includes 5 years of independent oversight. PG&E says it plans to hire more staff for wildfire safety positions. The San Diego Rescue Mission got the contract to run Oceanside's first homeless shelter last year, but construction has yet to start on the site. KPBS North County reporter Tanya Thorne explains the holdup.
I had a long drive, so I had to kind of take it.
Donnie D lets us inside the future site of Oceanside's first homeless shelter.
Not much has changed since we signed a service agreement, and I think that's unfortunate, but patience is a virtue, right? I mean, patience is the key, and I think it's been hard. But
he is the president of the San Diego Rescue Mission, the organization selected to run the shelter. It will be located at the old Ocean Shores High School off Oceanside Boulevard and El Camino Real. But the buildings are in need of a remodel, and a shovel has yet to hit the ground to prepare for the 50-bed homeless shelter.
Since November, it's just been submitting plans and trying to get permits and ready to go. I think our contractor had to get a license that was acceptable.
The site is city-owned, and working with a government agency is new territory for the rescue mission.
We typically own our own stuff, and we set our own timelines, but in working with another municipality and working with another city, you know, we've had to jump through some hoops just to try to figure this out, and I think that's delayed it a little bit.
D says he hoped to be open by now, but the city required 3 different bids for all work before one was approved. In a statement, the city of Oceanside said that when developing a project of this magnitude, it is normal and expected for plans to change. But D says work on the shelter is about to start.
We're ready to start demolition, and that will happen next week. That'll take a couple of weeks to get everything cleaned out, and then they will start to renovate this property.
The rescue mission is responsible for funding operations of the shelter, while the city is responsible for the remodel of the buildings. And over $2 million in federal funding was recently secured, dedicated to the remodel of the homeless shelter.
It's my understanding that that's what they will use to renovate this facility, which is about a $2 million budget. And then I think it's another $300,000 or $400,000 to furnish it.
While the 50-bed shelter won't solve homelessness in Oceanside, D says he hopes the shelter will fill up in order to need an expansion.
I hope that I have to go to my board and to the city and say, look, we don't have enough beds. We're getting people off the streets in a remarkable way. We need more beds. That would be a great next step, and I hope that happens.
D says demolition is expected to start in the coming weeks, and he hopes to be open by late summer. Tanya Thorne, KPBS News.
It's been 2 months since Tijuana evicted hundreds of asylum seekers from a makeshift migrant camp just south of the San Ysidro border crossing. Many of those migrants were pushed to the outskirts of town, where they face the prospect of homelessness in a dangerous neighborhood. KPBS reporter Gustavo Solis has more.
Rosa, who asked me not to use her last name, has been living in a constant state of terror. She and her 2 youngest children fled from their home in the Mexican state of Michoacan last year after members of a drug cartel stole her family's farm and kidnapped her oldest son. Now in Tijuana, Rosa still pays a monthly ransom of $60 a month to keep her son from being tortured.
Vivo aterrorizada día a día con mis hijos que en cualquier momento puedan saber dónde estamos. No soy una delincuente, no.
Rosa says that the cartel knows that she and her children are in Tijuana, and she's terrified at the thought of being found. She's currently living in the outskirts of town, paying $150 a month to share a one-bedroom apartment with 5 other people. She's waited nearly a year for a chance to request asylum in the U.S. That delay is caused by Title 42, a public health order from the Trump era that limits access to asylum seekers.
Pues es miedo andar aquí en Tijuana en la calle y que esas personas que nos hicieron daño nos encuentren, y pues de ahí en El Chaparral yo me sentía más segura.
Rosa says she felt much safer living at El Chaparral, a makeshift migrant camp near the San Isidro border crossing that was abruptly shut down by Tijuana authorities in February. For months, she lived in this tent community with hundreds of other asylum seekers, mostly from Mexico and Central America. She knew her neighbors, had access to social services, and could even work in nearby stores. Her new apartment is isolated and in a dangerous neighborhood. It takes her an hour to get to downtown Tijuana, where most of the jobs and social services are. Pedro Rios is an advocate with American Friends Service Committee. He says the living conditions in the camp were by no means ideal, but migrants were safer there than they are now.
Conditions for them, for many of them, went from bad to worse.
He says the migrants have been left to fend for themselves in one of the most dangerous cities in Mexico.
If you speak to them individually, you find out that they're going through some serious, troubling situations where they don't have housing, they lack access to information, they are much more susceptible to being robbed or being apprehended by the authorities.
Rosa's neighbor is an Honduran woman named Darcy. She is also running from gangs and asked me not to use her last name. Like Rosa, Darcy used to live in El Chaparral.
No tenemos trabajo. Hemos ido a buscar a fábricas, pero igual no aceptan extranjeros. Y pues nos toca vivir de la línea.
Darcy says there's no work in this part of Tijuana. She's applied for jobs at several maquiladoras, but they don't hire foreigners. She lives off whatever money she can make, begging and washing cars at the long border wait lines. Running out of options, Darcy is left waiting for U.S. border policy to change.
Estamos esperando siempre. Siempre estamos con la ilusión de que nos van a decir, ya necesitamos tal cosa para poder cruzar o qué sé yo, o alguna fecha, alguna esperanza, pues. Siempre vivimos con la idea de que nos van a dar una respuesta.
Rosa and Darcy's frustrations have heightened over the last couple of weeks. The same border officials who used Title 42 to block their asylum in the U.S. have allowed hundreds of Ukrainian war refugees to enter the country. Rosa understands that the Ukrainians are fleeing a war, but she says that living in Michoacán is almost like living in a war zone.
Me pregunto yo y le pregunto al gobierno, ¿que Michoacán no está en guerra? ¿O me van a decir que todo está bien?
The U.S. Department of State currently has a Level 4 travel advisory for Michoacán. It is the highest level and advises people to not travel there because of crime and kidnapping risks, the same thing that Rosa is fleeing from. After a year of waiting and living in constant fear, Rosa feels abandoned by both the American and Mexican governments.
Ya un año y viviendo con este temor aquí en nuestro país y no darnos una respuesta es muy difícil y la verdad sí me siento olvidada por las autoridades.
Gustavo Solís, KPBS News.
A former caregiver who worked in several San Diego area nursing homes faces a retrial on charges that he sexually assaulted elderly women in his care. In late March, a jury found Matthew Flucager guilty on 3 counts but deadlocked on 2 others. San Diego County prosecutors have told KPBS they will retry Flucager on those 2 remaining deadlocked counts of forcibly committing a lewd act on a dependent by a caretaker.
I'm Judy Woodruff. Tonight on the NewsHour, the head of the UN's refugee agency discusses the mass exodus of Ukrainians fleeing Russia's invasion. That's coming up at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
Sandag employees pulled out their agency credit cards hundreds of times for meals, and taxpayers covered the tab. Here's iNews Source investigative reporter Jennifer Bowman with more.
A $50 filet mignon, late dinners, and extravagant bills. The regional planning agency known as Sandag made it a regular practice to enjoy upscale dining on taxpayers' dime. Auditors had already flagged credit card purchases, including roughly $70,000 at local restaurants. But iNewsSource found that some of Sandag's highest paid staff often held business meetings at high-profile restaurants. Sometimes other government officials and even lobbyists join them. CEO Hassan Akrada is one of the agency's most frequent spenders. The executive director charged over $17,000 in just 2 years. Sandag says it's now updating its policies. So far, no word on whether any employee will face discipline. For KPBS, I'm iNewsSource investigative reporter Jennifer Bowman.
For more on this story, go to iNewsSource.org. iNewsSource is an independently funded nonprofit partner of KPBS. Attention Kmart shoppers, the once powerful retailer is nearly extinct. At one time, Kmart employed more than 300,000 people and had more than 2,400 stores. But after this location in Avenel, New Jersey closes this week, there will only be 3 left in the United States. Kmart filed for bankruptcy 2 decades ago and has been on a slow decline ever since. An author who has written several books about legacy department stores says he is sad about the closing of the retail chain, calling it a piece of Americana.
Everybody went to Kmart, whether you liked it or not. They had everything. You could go there. The men could go there for all, I mean, you had all the appliances, you had the tools. The women's had the children's clothes and the kids. Come on, you had toys, you had sporting goods, you had candy, you had stationery.
The only 3 remaining Kmarts will be in Westwood, New Jersey, Long Island, New York, and Miami, Florida. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org. Thank you for joining us and have a great evening.
Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating and air, restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley. And by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.